Welcome to the MS&Me Radio Network. The broadcast shows are for informational and entertainment purposes only. They are not designed to provide listeners with specific personal, medical, or counseling advice. Individuals with a medical issue should always consult their healthcare provider. MS&Me is not responsible for content of individual shows. The views expressed by show hosts or the guests are their own. Enjoy the show.
Hey there, welcome to the 42nd episode of A Couple Takes on MS. Hello, this is Dan Digman.
And I'm Jennifer Digman, Dan's wife.
And we are here. I hope you all are having a great summer. Was 4th of July is over and done with.
Yeah, that went by quickly.
And so everybody that we're talking with today, what we're going to address is traveling with care. I think when you're living with multiple sclerosis,
which we both are.
We truly are. And
on two fronts.
On two fronts. I have the relapsing remitting form.
And I have the secondary progressive form.
And thereby then we, in our married relationship of pushing 13 years.
It's getting close there, babe.
It is. But in 13 years, we serve as the primary caregiver for each other. And so you out there think of your caregivers, and when you travel, just how important it is to have caregivers with you to help with the process.
I agree, and I think that's very important. And caregivers, the first thing that I think of when you and I travel is we have to be prepared, both mentally and physically prepared. And so that's a huge thing. As your caregiver, I cannot start out exhausted, and as you as my caregiver, you can't start out exhausted. So we have to be physically prepared to travel.
And I think that's the big thing. What we'll talk about today is just give you some tips and some insights for things to think about the next time you travel. It can be a short trip, a day trip, or it could be a long-term trip. For us, we live in Michigan, and I originally am from Iowa, and so every year for the 4th of July, we go back to visit my family.
And make that 540-mile trip in the car in one of the hottest months of the year. So that gives you an idea of what we're starting with, is you have to get your mind prepared for what you're about to do.
And do a lot of the pre-troubleshooting. I think this was the big thing that we had going into it, knowing that it's incredibly hot, and it gets even more hot in Iowa with the humidity and whatnot.
Which is ridiculously hot.
It was treacherous.
So hot this year.
But something to look at, our air conditioning wasn't functioning well in the van. And we, with multiple sclerosis, as you all have experienced and know, we don't do well in the heat. So Jennifer made a specific effort to take the van up and have them recharge the air conditioner just so we could make that 540-mile drive.
And you being the one who has to do the driving, because in case you don't know, and this is the first time you've listened to A Couple Takes on MS, I use a wheelchair, and I am no longer driving. And so that 540-mile drive responsibility falls on Dan's shoulders, which he's fine with, typically. But when you're driving from a very warm Michigan to a very, very warm Iowa, I need to do my heavy lifting or do my part of the job and get the air conditioner recharged so that he is comfortable. And that is what I do as his caregiver. I try and make that drive as comfortable and just quick, and I can't mention comfortable as much as I can.
Well, and it's the other thing is looking at, we talked about caregivers, and whether it's your spouse, your children, a friend you're traveling with. The other thing is don't limit your team of caregivers. Expand the team and find others to help you, so that you, even though you have a direct or a primary caregiver, you have more people at your, I don't want to say disposal, but more people that you can connect with to help with.
And that, excuse me, I had a little frog in my throat. Ribbit. At the very onset of our trip, I expanded my team because I thought of my caregiver here in Michigan. Granted, he wasn't going on the trip with us, but Marcus could help me pack. He could help me get the van air conditioning recharged. He could help me with those things that you, Dan, would not have to expend time and energy trying to prepare. And we're very blessed that I have a caregiver in addition to Dan. But you have to reach out for people. You know, if I didn't have Marcus as a caregiver, possibly one of my church friends or one of my family members could help us get ready for the trip.
And not only that, wherever you're traveling, there's always try and have somebody on the other end where you're going who can help with that. And that's where for this trip, my family's back in Iowa, so I reached out to my mom and dad and my sister, my brother, to say, could you make sure that this is in order? Could you check on this? Could you make sure? I think case in point is just making sure there was a new restaurant / bar in town that we really wanted to check out. Dawn, my sister, went through and did a dry run at the bar to make sure that it was handicap accessible, so Jennifer's wheelchair could get in
Which
there.
it was, and it was delicious. If you're ever in Monticello, Iowa, I would recommend the Jitney. But we're not paid for that product placement or that endorsement. But it was really good of Dawn to go and make sure that it was a restaurant I would be able to get in with my wheelchair.
And I think that's another thing with checking on that and people on the other end. Find where you're going, talk to the people in the hotel, talk to the people at the venue where you're visiting, if you're going to an amusement park, going to Disney, wherever you're going, have other people find the things so you don't show up and have something terribly wrong, or things aren't accessible, or you don't have the things that you need.
Yeah, and that's very important because that can kind of wreck your trip if you're going someplace that's not accessible. That changes the direction your trip is going to take. And that's why it's important to do your due diligence and find out things beforehand. And with the internet, you can find out so much information. And that's really, really important. And another thing that I can't stress enough for Dan and I, again, it was a very warm trip from Michigan to Iowa, is we had to be honest, and we had to talk and communicate a lot, because it's easy for the driver and or the passenger to get in the zone. And Dan could be driving and he could be fussing with the air conditioning, or he could be just, posturing like he's really tired and we need to stop. And that's where, as his caregiver, I have to say, hey babe, do you want to stop the car, take a break? Do you need something to drink to cool you off? We just had to communicate and make that clear, because it wouldn't be fun if I wasn't talking to him, thinking about his needs, and then we get to Iowa and he's hot, cranky, and exhausted because I never checked in with him during the trip.
And I think that's part of the entire caregiving relationship, whether you're traveling or not, is that open line of communication. And have it established so that you can openly and honestly communicate with your caregiver, caregivee, and not feel like you're being judged or pass judgment. I mean, it's just where you're both on the same team. You want to communicate, and so and that's where Jennifer knows. I know it was like kind of out of the ordinary. It wasn't a normal stop for this 540-mile trip. But I just needed to stop. We didn't need water, we didn't need gas, we didn't need anything. I just needed to get out and stretch and just wake my body up and just stretch. And you know, I could have sucked it up and been cranky and crabby, and then that makes a really, really long trip, if you all know.
Yeah.
Been there, done that.
And then, you know, communication's important because when we drive from Michigan to Iowa, we have to drive around the city of Chicago, which is more trafficy than we're used to here in Mount Pleasant, Michigan. And so the driving, you know, I'm not driving, and I know that Dan has to put on his game face because we have to get through the city or around the city, and that's where communication is really important. You know, if I'm a little tired or I'm freaked out, Dan is understanding of that, and so the communication really helps because that part of the trip, that's maybe a 40-minute where it can seem really tense because you're just like, oh, wow, put on your game face and put the pedal to the metal. So I think that communication is important again.
And I think that when you're doing this, you work together, and I think that's in knowing where the other person is coming from. And I think if it's like you want to talk empathy, because yeah, there's times I know Jennifer's freaked out, and I'm totally fine with where we're at or what we're doing, but I have to understand where she is. But in turn, she has to understand where I am, and so.
And that doesn't mean we don't squabble every now and again when we get to the city of Chicago. Points. Exactly. You know, we have been married, as Dan mentioned earlier, almost 13 years. And we still, like, get a little tense in those moments. But as he also said, we have to remember we're on the same team. And any anger or frustration at that moment isn't directed at me or me directed at him. It's more about the situation. And those of you with multiple sclerosis, whether you're the person living with it or the caregiver, you understand those frustrations. They're not directed at your spouse or your care partner, but they're just often directed at the situation or the disease. And so that's why communication is so important. And you have to avoid assumptions, you know, that like assuming, oh, Jennifer's going to freak out when we get to Chicago. Well, you know, we were coming back and the city wasn't busy and it wasn't tense, and we just made it pretty clear and I was fine. And I think thinking, oh, Jennifer's going to freak out or Dan's going to get hot and cranky, that's not fair to your care partner. And so we needed to really communicate and just clear the air.
Yeah, and it's just as it goes, and celebrate when you get through the tense situations. And again, don't pass judgment, don't jump to conclusions, because, yeah, I'm not mad at you, and I always tell Jennifer, and I think this is not specific to or exclusive to those of us with multiple sclerosis. Ask any married couple, they'll say 9 times out of 10 they argue in the car when they're traveling in new, different places or tense situations. And so it's just building that in to say, okay, this is where we're at, and, you know, move forward and don't dwell on it, because it was, and I always say, it was the situation, the very moment, and I would rather she nag at me or that there's another car or somebody stopping, because I tell her it's better than the alternative if I by chance didn't see it or wasn't aware. So again, working together.
And that's really, really important because, you know, we're a team. And we have to work together for the best of #Team Digman or whatever your married or couple name is. That's, you have to just really work together. And when we were in Iowa, this was kind of different. Do you mind if I talk about this really quick?
I don't know what you're going to talk about, so bring it.
Super! It's surprise Dan. But Dan recently has started a new job. And when we were in Iowa, he needed to leave the hotel and go about a half hour away to meet his new team of coworkers. And granted, he's working here in Michigan, he's working remotely. But while we were in Iowa, he needed to seize that opportunity. Well, that is when the caregiving dynamic stretches out. we have to rely on other people. And fortunately, my sister-in-law, Dawn, and her beautiful daughter, Elizabeth, they took care of me that day while Dan was driving to Cedar Rapids. Granted, when I say take care of, that was a harsh game, or what's the word I'm looking for? It was a cutthroat game of chutes and ladders, but it was really fun. And so for that span of time, when Dan wasn't at the hotel, the caregiving duties were on Dawn a little bit more, and that made it easier for you, I imagine.
Well, and I think that was the big thing, because I did start a new job, and like Jennifer said, working remotely. So I'm here in Michigan, but the headquarters of the company is right there close to where I grew up, and so I was able to go down. But I mean, that was the big question then, because I didn't want Jennifer to be at the hotel by herself, in case there was an emergency or she needed something. Fortunately, my sister was there, but that's where you expand your caregiving circles, because I had my mom and dad that could have been there just in case.
Right.
But you move forward and you do that, and so I think that was that put my mind at ease. Excuse me, when I was there, and that's the thing where take the help. Is that Rachel Ray?
Oh, heck yeah, that's Rachel Ray, 30-minute meal.
Take the help where you can get it, and I think that totally applies to when you're traveling or when you need care. That I want to be the provider man, and I can do this, blah blah blah. And if I'm there and I'm unloading the van from the traveling into the hotel, or from the hotel into the van, my brother-in-law, my mom and dad always offer, can we help you unload? Can we help you with this? And more often than not, I say, no, I got this. I realized this time I needed help, and that's, because with my new job, they gave me my new computer, my new monitor, so rather than keeping all of that equipment in an incredibly hot van and stuff, I had to move this stuff, and it was heavy and treacherous, and that's a lot of walking, a lot of trips in and out. So ask for people, find the help.
And it is very much with my sister-in-law and her husband. They appreciate being able to help. They want to make a contribution, but then they have a daughter. And when they need a babysitter, they know they can ask Dan and I to watch beautiful Elizabeth. And it is just, that is the dynamic, having been married for all these years. And it's taken a little time. And let's be honest, babe, you're not always the most receptive or to asking for help or believing you need help. But when you get it, you're always thankful afterwards. You're like, yeah, that really cut down the burden on me. And I think that's so important in our caregiving relationship. I need to encourage you to ask for help and to know it's not like a knock against you if you're getting help.
And I think that's the big thing, excuse me, as you're asking for help, as you're moving forward, it makes things so much easier. And the one thing, we as people who receive the care, the big thing that we always have to remember is don't take it for granted. Don't feel entitled.
Yeah.
Always show the appreciation. Always express appreciation and thanks for everything. I mean, especially if it's not a family member or friend. If you're traveling and like you're there and somebody at the airport or somebody at a restaurant or something helps you or is extremely helpful.
I remember we went to a restaurant. This was our last trip for Dan's parents' 50th anniversary. And we went into a restaurant that was accessible with effort. We needed... Do you remember that, what I'm talking about?
It was the supper club.
It was the supper club, and I could get into the restaurant, but I needed help. I have a big, heavy wheelchair, and I'm not a dainty woman by myself. And so there were patrons in the restaurant who helped push me in and, lift me over this large...
Oh, it was a big lip, a big threshold to get in. Well, and it was off a gravel approach because it was on a gravel driveway or gravel parking lot. Nice facility, but it wasn't the most accessible. But people want to help. I mean, and obviously, I think we could talk about times when people weren't so kind and people were rude, but more often than not, people. I mean, I guess if it comes back to like the golden rule, and you know that you would offer help if you could, or anytime you could help. So all you're doing is it's giving another person an opportunity to help you and give you support.
And it's the human experience. We're all going through something, which I often say. Somebody helps us to get me and my big chair into a supper club one night. Well, then maybe the next month we're going to go to the movies and see a woman who has 2 children who's like, I need a little help, and we'll be able to help them. So you want to remember the kindness that you received and then pay it back or pay it forward.
Exactly, and I think that's a big thing, is just not forget that. I think
Yeah. And I think that, as we're back in Michigan, we remember some of the really smart things we did on this trip, because it was really warm and we froze water here in Michigan, which was like 2-prong thing, because when we got in the van, if we got warm, there was a big frozen bottle of water that you could cool off with. But then also, as it melted, we had a cool drink, which is important for MS, for people living with the disease. So, that was a tip of something that really helped us. And we, as crazy as it sounds, we overpacked because we weren't 100% sure how hot it was going to be in Iowa. And at night, it did cool down quite a bit. So it was a good thing we overpacked and we had sweatshirts. And I have this big wheelchair that I'm in all of the time, but I was having some questionable problems, like, is this chair going to work while we're there? And so we packed a smaller wheelchair just to be on the safe side, because as you, Dan, as my caregiver, I know it's not fun to push me and Grape Ape,
and
my wheelchair.
Well, I think that's the big thing, yeah, because your wheelchair had like an electric short, or seemingly electric short, that had been sort of recurring of late, and it started to work again, but you were afraid of like what would happen if we got all the way to Iowa and your chair didn't work. And so when you're taking trips, when you have the caregiving, work with your caregiver and troubleshoot as much as you can. I mean, don't freak out over things and have it ruin the trip or make the trip more stressful, but think of, on the surface, what could potentially happen. I mean, so you always want to pack extra things. You want to...
And so it's like disaster preparedness, if you will.
Pretty much.
Like, if my big chair, Grape Ape, stopped working, I needed to have another chair, and fortunately we're able to do that. And that really gave us both peace of mind. We weren't worried what would happen. And so that's one of the things that I remember. And so when we plan for future trips, we will remember, oh yeah, it does get a little cool at night. So as crazy as it sounds when it's 90 degrees during the day, pack another sweatshirt or something a little warmer for the evening. So...
Well, and it seemed silly because it was going to be 90-some degrees, but yeah, then at night it would get chilly, or because it's 90-some degrees outside, your restaurants, your hotels, chances are they're keeping the temperature very, very, very cold. And I mean, if we're avoiding the heat of the outside and staying inside, you might want to have a little something extra to bundle up, and I think it's always smart to do.
My brother has always said you can always take a coat off, and he's right. You bring a coat, you can take the coat off, and that way you're comfortable. And so these are some of the tips, the things that we use in our packing and our travels. And we always pack patience. I would be remiss if I didn't say that. We always pack patience. But when I was reading the June-July issue of Brain and Life magazine, I saw this article, and a lot of these tips, we've kind of riffed on them a little bit because Brain and Life magazine is not solely about multiple sclerosis. But there were tips in this article that really we could kind of, like I said, riff on and make it applicable to traveling with our multiple sclerosis.
And I think what's interesting and cool about this article is it features one of our friends that we had met at the Public Policy Conference in Washington, D.C., huge MS activist, and I would say it's on page, it starts on page 47 and Samantha, and it's easy, I don't even know how to pronounce Sam's last name, but anyway,
yeah.
Sam, we know her as Sam, but this great article on caregiving in this issue of the magazine, and it goes beyond multiple sclerosis, but it's something really to, we encourage you to check out, and those were just some of the tips then that we had developed either over the 13 years of being each other's caregivers and just from this recent trip to Iowa.
And all our experiences got together to help us create this list. And so we wanted tonight thank the Blue Giraffe Kid for composing the theme music to our show. And of course, we want to thank MS&Me Radio Network for allowing us to share our stories with a couple takes on MS.
And so with that, thank you all. You can reach out and connect with us and give us your tips on caregiving on our website at danandjenniferdigman.com or on Twitter at danjendig. Until next time, thank you and take care.